All right, well, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our Webinar Wednesday event this week. We're focusing on the whole family building blocks, and today our topic is aligning high quality, intentional, intensive services to parents and children. So this is a part of a three-part webinar series. So the previous 2 weeks, previous 2 Wednesdays to today, we have done other whole family building blocks presentations. So I encourage you to check those out, and they'll be referenced throughout the webinar. This is also hosted by the Learning Communities Resource Center at the National Community Action Partnership. And I'm Courtney Kohler. I'm a Senior Associate on the Training and Technical Assistance team. A few different housekeeping items just before we get started. So as far as if you're having any trouble with your audio, especially if you're on the computer audio, you might try switching to phone, and to do that, you can go to the Communicate tab, which is in the upper left-hand corner, and go to Audio Connection, and it should let you either switch or adjust your audio controls. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so make sure that you're entering those in the chat box or the Q&A box, and then we'll make sure those get filtered to the presenters. We do have everyone muted to cut down on background noise, so you don't have to worry about that. And if you have any questions or audio issues directly for me, you can chat me as the host through the chat window. But otherwise, please send your questions about the presentation to all panelists. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started and give you some introductory information, and then I'll hand it over to our presenters today. So we always like to start our webinars and presentations with the promise of community action, as it really grounds us in the work that we do. So you all can join along with me as I say it. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. All right, so as I said, this is sponsored by the Learning Communities Resource Center, and really the part of, or the purpose of this program at the Community Action Partnership is to really analyze community action outcomes and identify those effective, promising, and innovative practice models that are present throughout the country that alleviate causes and conditions of poverty. And so really we're just focusing on building that community action agency capacity to fight poverty across the nation. So our Learning Community Resource Center team is made up of lots of people that make this possible, including our learning community groups as well as our national webinars. And so Jar Quacker, our Director of Training and Technical Assistance, supports our work, and then our project director is Tiffany Marley. We have 2 program associates, Hyacinth McKinley and Liza Forrest. Then myself, Courtney Kohler, the Senior Associate. And then we have Jeannie Chapman, who's actually with us today, that has been a consultant over the past year, especially related to our whole family approach, learning community group and community of practice. And so with that, I'll actually go ahead and turn it over to Jeannie Chapman. As I said, she's a consultant, and she works with us on our Community Action Economic Mobility Initiative. So Jeannie, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here with you. As Courtney said, I have been working with the partnership on supporting community action agencies that want to shift to a whole family approach. And we have a number of community action agencies that are in a learning community and another group of folks in a community of practice that are making great headway on shifting to a whole family approach. This webinar today is open to everybody in the network. We have a lot of different folks with us, and we're going to kind of go over some background and some framework about 2 generations, specifically supporting parents and children at the same time. And we welcome everybody on the webinar today to talk with us about a particular area that is really important to a whole family approach. We also have with us today one of the coaches for our community of practice. Dale Hayes is president of Hayes Group, LLC, And Gail is working with 3 community action agencies in various places in the country who are in the community of practice and really shifting to a whole family approach. We're really excited about having Gail coaching with us and being a subject matter expert for us on our call today and hopefully on future webinars. Gail has previously worked with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who, as many of you know, is doing some groundbreaking work in the 2-generation whole family approach. And even more exciting is Gail led Casey's Atlanta Civic site, which really not only focused on supporting parents and children together, but really thinking deeply about how to address poverty in highly concentrated areas. So it was both a community level and an individual or family level initiative. So she brings a lot of really good practical on-the-ground experience. And since leaving, Casey has been doing a lot of consulting around the country, so has seen a lot of good examples of what whole family and 2-gen looks like. So we're happy to have Gail. So our time together today, Gail and I are going to present some material for your review. And as we're going through, please feel free to make comments in the chat box to us or to the whole group if you'd like. And we'll each, Gail and Courtney and I will kind of monitor that chat box and try to answer questions at the right moment. So today there are a lot of building blocks that folks need to think about when they're shifting to a whole family approach. And I'm going to talk about just that framework that we have to lay out some of those building blocks. And then Gail and I are going to go more deeply into one of those building blocks today, aligning high-quality, intentional, intensive services to parents and children. And then Gail's going to go very deep in talking about parent engagement, success factors from practice that she's familiar with, and then we'll have time for some questions and some review of resources. So I know some of you, probably most of you who are joining us today are sort of thinking about 2-gen or whole family or service integration. I think that there's a real appetite in the Community Action Network for thinking about that. Many in our network want to increase impact and achieve results that are bigger than we've ever achieved before. And so we know that to do that, we have to look at sort of putting things together in new ways, intensifying, improving the quality of what we provide. And a lot of that is happening in the whole family approach that we're looking at together. We are sort of operating on this idea at the partnership through the whole family work that we're doing, that if we redirect our strategy from just program results to creating conditions where the whole agency participates in developing solutions and the whole agency resources are brought to bear on the work that we're doing with families, that we'll be able to increase greater impact. That redirecting of strategy really does require change, and change requires leadership and thinking very deeply about what you're doing. So we're trying to address change and leadership and organizational culture and alignment of services in the building blocks that we've been highlighting as part of this 3-part webinar that Courtney mentioned earlier. So just quickly, just in case you're a little bit new to whole family and to 2-gen, just a reminder that a whole family approach is sort of defined as integrating services to meet the needs of parents and children together at the same time, and really trying to use that approach to increase efficiency and increase outcomes for parents and children together. Many times in a community action agency or even a multifaceted community-based organization, we are maybe providing some adult services and some child services, but are we providing those to the same family at the same time and with some appropriate level of intensity, quality, and intentionality? And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about whole family. Our goals, really the characteristics that you need to think about when you're thinking about whole family is that there should be goals for the parents, goals for the children, and goals for the family overall. And we should be tracking those goals, those outcomes, and those results for the entire family. That's really going to mean creating an alignment of a suite of services that respond to the unique needs of a particular family. And as we know from our work in community action, you know, families start at lots of different places, so there are a lot of different kinds of services that need to be available. Maybe it's employment, maybe it's early childhood, but likely it's also some mental health services, maybe some financial coaching. So really a suite of services that are going to meet a family's needs. Improving access so families don't have to navigate confusing eligibility processes and different doors and different caseworkers. And then what we're going to talk a little bit more about today is that services really need to be high quality. We're coordinating mediocre services isn't going to get us better outcomes. We need to be providing high quality early childhood, high quality financial coaching. Services should be intensive. We have some light touch services often that we're providing, but to really achieve the outcomes that we're talking about, we need to be thinking about the more intensive services. And then there needs to be a lot of intentionality. For example, we have kids that might be in Head Start or early childhood. Can we offer the parent components, whether it's a GED class or a training class, at the same time and maybe even in the same location? And that's what looking intentional might look like. All right, so the other sort of visual that we have here for you is a look at our whole family approach building blocks. So after talking to a lot of community action agencies, talking to some community action agencies who are really advanced in their journey to shift to a whole family, talking to other community-based organizations, looking at assessments that are out there about readiness for a whole family, we came up at the partnership with this building blocks for a whole family approach. And on the partnership's website, you can find this building blocks document and then a resource document that gives you resources for each of these particular building blocks. So we're going to talk about aligning high-quality, intentional services to parents today. Last week, as Courtney said, we have a webinar, it's recorded, on organizational culture. The week before that, we did a webinar on leadership. And over time, we'll be addressing these other building blocks, securing funding, which is always important, engaging family voices, designing and implementing with an equity lens. The partnership already has a number of webinars on their website about looking at work with an equity lens. And so these are sort of all the different components that we think people need to attend to successfully shift to a whole family approach. Here's just a quick snapshot of the document that we have that sort of outlines sort of the key elements of each building block and then gives you a number of resources that you can go and review to get smarter about that particular building block. Somebody said to me, Jeannie, there are way too many resources in there. We could never read all of those. And my suggestion was if there's a particular building block, let's say engaging family voices, that you really think you need to do a better job of, split up the resources in that area among a team of folks at your agency who are working and noodling around on this topic, and then come together at a meeting and sort of download your learning from those particular resources. So there's a lot of resources. And I think if folks tap into those, they'll feel like they can get a lot smarter about a lot of these topics. So high-quality, intentional, intensive services. First off, we're sort of framing that up, that what kinds of services are we talking about? Well, as Gail will talk more about later, there's some basics like early childhood education. The science really tells us that early childhood education can be just critical to the success and health of people as adults, and that if we can really provide high quality early childhood education, that can put people on the pathway to get out of poverty. But that probably is only going to work if we're also intervening with the parents and making sure that the parent is achieving economic security. And that's going to mean different things for different parents, right? It might mean post-secondary education, helping them get into a community college, or it might be some other kind of training or certification, or helping them to get into the workplace, get a better job, find a job with livable wages. So we want to, think about our post-secondary and employment pathways. And then, as we know from our work with families, it's really important to think about the health, the mental health, the well-being of everybody in the family, not just the parent and maybe the child that's in Head Start, but all family members. And so having some way to attend to health and well-being is really important. Economic supports, I mentioned financial coaching is very important to helping families obtain some kind of economic security. And then also recognizing that social capital, the supports that families have, the relationships they have in the community and with others, and the connections they have to bridge relationships and to bridge into different networks really can make a difference in that family's success. And then we've also added some other things here that we think are really important to attend to. And when you start looking at 2-gen whole family models, often you'll see folks with pretty robust components focused on executive functioning, really improving the parents' executive functioning, their ability to problem solve and set goals and stay on task, as well as the child. And so there's some really innovative programs out there that work on executive functioning with both the parent and the child at the same time. And then finally, the importance of the parent-child relationship and helping parents to be the best parents they can be. We want to make sure that they have the capacity to buffer stress and trauma, because we know that's really important to long-term health and success. So thinking about all of these different kinds of domains and components, and that we're providing high-quality services in all of these areas. And please don't assume that we're saying that, you as a community action agency to be 2-gen or whole family have to provide every one of these interventions yourself. I think the best approach is to bring partners together who have many different kinds of resources and think about how to align these supports, these resources for parents and children. And so some of our best programs have really robust relationships with community colleges or with workforce to provide career coaching, or with the public health folks to do some of the health and well-being work. But it's how do you get intentional about aligning that for a family, for the parent, for all the children in the family in an intensive way over time. So that's really what this building block is about. We also want to remember that this is, again, not just about doing this inside the Community Action Agency, but doing this with partners. We know that research consistently shows that kids do well when their parents do well, and providing that full range of services to parents and really making sure that we are addressing potential gaps in our services or in the alignment of services for parents across the community is important. So some additional things to consider. We just wanted to point out that, we have had these other webinars recently on other building blocks. We did a session on leadership, as I said, and talked about establishing a guiding coalition and a shared common agenda and organizational culture, really getting into thinking about how do you embed this work with staff and how do you communicate and think about data and those things that are really important to culture and process. And so those webinars, the links are here, and when we post this slide deck, you should have access to the links, but they're all on the partnership's website under webinars, so you can feel free to access this, send this to colleagues who maybe weren't able to attend this session or listen into the other sessions we've had on building blocks lately. Also, just sort of a few more things to consider, about why you would sort of pursue alignment of parent and child services. Certainly, it potentially can be less costly for families when we align and coordinate services. It may make it easier for families to stick with their plan when we coordinate and integrate services. And it also, if done as a cohort model, it can really connect parents to other support folks who are working on the same things that they're working on, and that can be really helpful. So some of the ways, some of the tactics that we've seen folks use, maybe redesigning older services or creating new services to fulfill that list that I went over earlier, integrating services in new ways. So I mentioned, having a GED class that parents can access at the same time and same location as maybe when their kids are getting Head Start or early childhood services. Screening and enrolling families into multiple programs at one time. So we have some community action agencies that are sort of doing a no wrong door approach. And so when families come in, maybe for LIHEAP, maybe for utility assistance, they're offered an opportunity to connect up with a number of different services for them and their kids at the same time. So that no wrong door approach is often a part of this. So just some things for you to consider. What existing services are already available in your agency that sort of bring these services together for parents and children? So you might sort of ponder that question. What services are not available? Where might you need to reach out to folks in the community? What new links do you plan to create between services? Is it a common intake, or some agencies are doing coordinated case management and are getting together at regular times to help plan with families and coordinate work, and then even thinking about policies and systems that you may be able to change in your agency or even in your community that would support parents and children. And then finally, I wanted to just highlight a report that goes directly to everything that we're talking about today, about the importance of aligning and integrating services for parents and children. So at the Administration for Children and Families, they have an office on planning, research, and evaluation, the OPRE, and they have put out a report just a little, not quite a year ago, on what does it look like around the country to frame up alignment of parent and child services. And they went out and looked at a number of whole family 2-gen approaches around the country. They didn't do site visits, but they analyzed information available on the web and came up with this framework for whole family approaches. So I just want to suggest that you take a look at that report if you want to think a little bit more about this. It's a really great resource. You can see from this framework that they sort of summarize the different kinds of services that many programs are providing, and then some short and long-term outcomes for the parent, for the child, and for the family. So I think this is a really helpful resource in this space. So with that, we're going to pass the ball over to Gail, and she's going to go a little bit deeper into some of these subjects and also bring in some experience that she's had with different efforts across the country in the two-generation space. So Gail, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Great. Thanks, Jeannie. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. And I bring greetings from Atlanta. Jeannie asked me to share this presentation with you all. It was one that I recently developed for People, Inc., which is one of the community action agencies participating in the Community of Practice for Whole Family. It's about a 20-minute presentation, and it's intended to be an overview of a whole family or two-generation approach. I'll use the term two-generation probably more often than whole family, but both of the terms are exactly the same. I'll talk about a definition for two-generation or whole family. I'll talk a little bit about the research and science that supports the approach, why this approach is needed, some of the key components, which Jeannie's done a great job of reviewing with you. I'll talk to you about the Atlanta two-generation model, and then end with what we think are some of the emerging critical success factors. So my favorite mantra when I talk about two-generation is that kids do well when their families do well, and families do best when they have every opportunity to succeed in school, at work, and as parents. And a simple but we think powerful theory of change is that if parents and kids both have simultaneous access to family economic supports, essential skill building for parents, and the highest quality early education for children, then that family has the very best chance of securing permanent economic security. So I want to go in a little bit more detail in those three components that I just mentioned. I want to talk about financial stability first. And this is really providing parents with a pathway. I'm going to actually describe all three of these as pathways. That includes education and job training, work supports, and coaching to achieve financial stability. Having more family income, especially in a child's earliest years, can make a lifelong difference. The second pathway I'll describe as parent engagement, and that's partnering with parents to provide the tools, the resources, the social connections to become confident, competent, and connected parents. And I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about the 3 C's, parents being competent, confident, and connected, and how important those are for both the parents, the kids, and the family. And then the last pathway is what I'd like to call, and I saw on the previous slide they had 0 to 12. It's really thinking about the earliest years and all the way through the first 3 grades in elementary school. And that's providing children with access to the highest quality early learning experiences and elementary school experiences so they're ready for school and that they succeed in school. I want to talk to you a little bit about the science and research. We don't have enough time to go into detail here, but there are 3 bodies of science and research that really underpin a two-generation theory of change. And the first one is about increased family income. And it can really improve a child's likelihood for school success. Greg Duncan, who's a professor at the University of California at Irvine, has done a longitudinal study that shows that $3,000 to $4,000 a year can make a huge impact on a kid's success in life. The second body of research is around positive parent and child relationships. And if we can develop these strong relationships, they can help buffer the toxic stress for kids living in poverty. And the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard has really done a great job of putting the science and the evidence around this. They have videos, they have papers, they have infographics, and they've started doing a lot of research on how to create resiliency or develop resiliency in kids. So I think that body of science is being built out more and more. And the last one, which you all know, as many of you are operating Head Start and early Head Start programs, is the importance of the brain science. And what it's revealed is the importance of early learning on a child's cognitive and emotional development. Early experiences affect the development of the brain, we know, and which really forms the foundation for lifelong learning, behavior, and health. We know we're learning more and more about families living in poverty, and this slide talks about some of those, what we're learning, some of the statistics we're learning. That 80% of parents living in poverty lack a post-secondary education. Only half work full-time. There are significant language and literacy barriers. When you look at the two bar graphs, it really shows the income gap between a family living in poverty and what the real cost, the monthly cost for a single parent with 2 children. Child care takes up nearly half of the income, and low wages do not really cover the low wages of a parent with just a high school degree, do not really cover the full cost. We also know more about the systems that serve children living in poverty. What I've shown here is the 3 big systems that serve kids and families. Is a workforce system, an early childhood system, and an education system. Unfortunately, what we find is these organizations serve either kids or adults, but rarely both. Workforce is primarily focused on the parents. Early childhood education is focused mainly on the kids, and the education systems can either be K-12 or post-secondary, and it depends on K-12 is focused on the kids, and the post-secondary is focusing on young adults. The funding streams are typically separate and inflexible to support a whole family approach. And we also know the adverse impact poverty can have on kids. A child raised in poverty is more likely to become an adult living in poverty. They're less likely to graduate from high school or remain consistently employed as adults. 42% of children born to parents at the bottom income ladder stay there. So we know that poverty can take a serious toll on kids and their parents' health and well-being. And it is especially detrimental in the first 8 years. So this slide really talks about the promise of a whole family approach. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of the important outcomes. For the family, it's really reducing all of that toxic stress that happens when a family's living in poverty. For the parent, it can mean better meeting the family's basic needs. And for the child, in addition to the cognitive developmental milestones that can increase, it also can increase the social and emotional development. But, I wish I could make this slide a little different and have some kind of animation, because there's really a multiplier effect. When the parent outcomes improve, their kids are typically, we find that they're better off. And as the kids make progress, parent confidence grows. And as the family stress is decreased, both the parent and child feel better, and their mental health is better. So they're really, these are all outcomes, but they really multiply themselves as the family gets stronger. I want to talk to you about, Jeannie went over these core components, but this actually model comes from Ascend, which is one of the thought leaders on 2 Generation. And they really emphasize, you'll see the 2 big wheels on the chart. It's early childhood education and post-secondary employment pathways. There's also important emphasis on social capital, helping families build their networks, their friends and their neighbors, connections to friends and neighbors, health and well-being, and that's both mental health and addressing adverse childhood experiences, and then economic supports. I'm just going to show this model one more time. This is the Annie E. Casey model for 2Gen. I want to mention that I want to go back to this parent engagement. In these three components, there's a lot of resources and science and to support this. The area that we found that was not as deep and wide was in the parent engagement field. So we actually decided to develop a tool for practitioners and parents who are going to be doing this whole family work. And as you all know, parent engagement's a process. You're all going to be at different places with it. We designed this tool to be responsive to the field. I actually had the opportunity to field test it with two important 2Gen programs, Tulsa CAP and Educational Alliance in New York City. And we really adjusted the tool based on input from the field. It organizes work with parents along 4 domains. It looks at building a culture of respect, inclusion, and equity. It looks at coaching parents for confidence and competence. It also talks about listening to parents and having them as partners. And the last is partnering with other organizations to do this work. In each domain, it has 3 levels. It has the kind of the starting out level, the moving to the next level of the work, and then going to the more advanced level. And it has, these levels offer deeper ways to include engagement. There's also a resource guide to help you when you identify your areas for improvement, resources to use to help you in that process. This is just an example of the toolkit. This is the domain around coaching parents on competence and confidence. And there's 4 or 5 questions in each level. And the one I've highlighted is, do you provide opportunities for parents to connect with one another to build relationships, collaborate, and support one another? It's that whole notion about building connections. And this toolkit is on the Building Blocks website that Jeannie mentioned a few minutes ago. I want to show you the Atlanta Civic site 2-generation approach. I had the privilege of working and opening the office for the Annie Casey Foundation in Atlanta, and one of our primary strategy for our work was around 2-generation. And we started with the Center for Working Families. Jobs were the #1 priority of the neighbors who lived in the neighborhoods we worked in. And so we built up the Center for Working Families. We were one of the first centers that the foundation established in the country. We actually focused on a lot of work readiness, getting parents ready for the world of work. We also made sure that every benefit and work support that was available to parents was that parents understood and knew about. And then we did a lot of work on building assets for families. And then we also quickly recognized that the #1 barrier for parents of getting and keeping good jobs was childcare. And so we began to develop a learning complex in the neighborhood. It's literally next door to the Center for Working Families. It's actually, you can start at birth and go all the way through elementary school. There's a high-quality early education, Educare Atlanta, located on the first floor. We then built out a great deal. We did spend a lot of investment time on building capacity building in parent education and leadership. And then we began to focus on health and well-being and social connections. So one of the things I want to share with you is what we're learning about what are the critical success factors in developing a successful whole family approach. And this is a term, critical success factors, comes from the business world, about the variables that you have to have in place to be successful. And without them, you're kind of less likely to achieve what you set out to do. And the first one of those is increasing family income. And so what I've constructed here is a chart that actually shows you the pathway of moving a family whose income is 100% of the poverty level and moves all the way up to a little bit above 200% of the poverty level. And what this chart shows is what it takes to increase that income step by step. And I do want to say that in each of these steps, depending on where the parent starts, whether or not they have a high school degree or what their literacy level is, each one of these might take anywhere, depending on, 6 months to a year, depending on where they start. The second step is increasing family income by about $6,500, and that's making sure that parents are getting every work support, earned income tax, and the child tax credit. The third is actually another heavy lift, which is making sure that parents get connected to sectorial training programs or credentialing programs. And a good example of this is with Tulsa CAP. They have a career advance, and they have 10 different healthcare career tracks of parents being able to get credentials. And then the fourth step is getting even, the lift is heavier, parents getting advanced credentialing or earning an associate's degree. And then the last is where parents are really financially self-sufficient, and it's really from getting a 4-year college degree. We've had parents where this pathway took 5 years. We had parents that this pathway took 8 years. It really depends on where the parent is and the amount of coaching and support that they need. The second critical success factor is the platform. And you'll see there that many of you represent 2 of those platforms, both Head Start and Community Action Agencies, which we think is an ideal way to build out a 2-generation successful approach. The third success factor is reforming the systems or the agencies to adopt a whole family approach. And this chart actually comes out of a report that the Annie Casey Foundation prepared. It's developing an infrastructure to address parent and child needs together. And it really talks about that in many communities, agencies are really operating in complete isolation. The next level is agencies share information and understand each other's work. And it goes all the way to a coordinated community response where everybody is on the same page about adopting a whole family approach. The fourth factor is engaging the whole family. And this is I think this is really what makes whole family or 2-gen different from other reform efforts. It really puts families at the center. It focuses on relationship building trust. It's getting parents as co-designers, co-creators, and it's helping families build important social capital. And as I mentioned to you earlier that I would talk more about this, I had an opportunity after I retired from my Atlanta Civic Site Director job to travel around the country for the foundation. And I interviewed the best practitioners at that time about what are the most important skills that we're trying to build with parents in a 2-generation model. And the 3 C's emerged from that. Children and parents who see themselves as competent and confident feel powerful. They're more likely to be resourceful, to believe in themselves, to attempt difficult challenges, and to exhibit resiliency in the face of setbacks. The good news is that with coaching and work, confidence, competence, and connections can be acquired. It turns out you can actually make the brain more confidence prone. It's called, the brain science calls it plasticity. We like to call it hope. And then the last critical success factor is a focus on outcomes. constantly asking the question, are families better off with this approach? And there are 3 threshold outcomes for 2Gen. These are kind of without these 3 outcomes, it's really not going to have the power and the impact of the approach. One is increases in education or income for parents. For the kids, it means increases in developmental milestones, literacy, or social emotional development. And for the family, it's really improvements in the confidence, social connections, and competence of parents as workers and as parents. So in closing, I'd like to leave with you to think about whole family as creating every opportunity for every family to succeed. And your most important job in a whole family approach, regardless of your job title, is to make sure that parents get connected to education and training and employers that can lead to family supporting wages. Second, to ensure that kids receive the highest quality early learning experiences in elementary education, and commit to helping parents develop the skills and confidence to be both their best advocate and caregiver for kids. I'll stop there, and I think we can take questions.
All right, well, if anyone has any questions, please submit those in the chat box now. I'm going to give people just another minute or two in case there are questions. Not seeing any currently, though. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions come in, but we'll pause after some of our closing announcements to make sure that there haven't been any additional questions. But just to let you all know, if you haven't checked out the chat box, Jeannie has put in a couple of resources and comments, and then I also put in the link to the previous webinars earlier, so you can grab those links for future reference. All right, we did actually have a question just come in, and it asks, Kim is asking, how do you propose reporting out or measuring the outcomes listed in the second to last slide? So we can go back up to, I believe these threshold outcomes is probably what Kim is talking about. So I'll let, Gail, I'll let you go ahead and answer that. How do you propose reporting out or measuring the outcomes listed in the second to last slide?
Well, let's start with the first one, increases in education or income. The education is, you do a baseline of what the parent's education when you start working with them, and then you're collecting data on how that education increases over time. And the same thing with income. You're doing your baseline data collection on where your parents start, and then as their income increases over time based on the strategies you're using. Again, using kind of a results-based accountability, you're looking for measurable indicators of each of these. And, Ascend on their website has an outcomes bank and really has more detailed information on indicators of increased education income. For the kids, as many of you who are involved in Head Start, there's a developmental milestones that have been created for Head Start. So you're looking at where kids are starting with a particular milestone and how their development is progressing. The same thing on their literacy. On social emotional, there are good scales that develop how kids increase their resiliency and become more socially and emotionally developed. The improvements in confidence, social connections, and competence, a little tougher to do this work. Social connections, we've got some good tools to look at what people's connections look like when they started out. And most of this is really getting surveys from parents to talk about how they feel more confident, more competent, and more connected. The Family Futures down east in Maine has done a good job with a parent survey to really look at these 3 C's and how they change over time in their 1-year post-secondary program.
All right, thank you, Gail. We just had
Courtney, I might.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Courtney. I just might say a little bit about that. So,
Okay.
I'm not, sure exactly what folks. I know we always talk about a lot of challenges in tracking outcomes for parents and children, and even the family, because oftentimes the information about outcomes for those different populations is in different systems. So just sort of flagging for folks that one of the projects that the partnership has is some effort to test out some solutions about pulling data from systems where parent information may be and child, and then sort of putting it together and thinking about what that looks like when we put it together and what we do know and what we don't know. So I think that there may be some technology opportunities for us that we can learn from in the partnership as we learn with a few agencies what that might look like. We're going to be making that available to everybody. But we certainly do appreciate that oftentimes that's one of the challenges that folks have to kind of overcome in addition to just measurement in general.
All right, thank you. We have another question that came in that is asking if Gail could repeat what you said about when the parents and children are competent, they feel more powerful.
Right. So in the 2-generation field, this is commonly referred to as executive function, but I think that is kind of a mouthful, so we actually translated that to be competent. And it's really increasing both the emotional and the mental competence of parents. And if you think about the executive function science or research, it's really helping parents become better decision makers, helping them set goals, helping them break so say for instance a parent, what they really need to do is make an application for a community college. And part of that is really coaching them and helping them build the skills to break that down into small tasks so that they can be successful in that important task, which is completing the financial aid and the community college application. So the competence is really around both knowledge and skills. And that's being done by many 2-generation programs through something called coaching. And there's one program that I'm encourage you to look at, which is Empath in Boston. They do something called mobility mentoring, and they've got a lot on their website about how they break these tasks into small, doable tasks for parents, and to build their competence so they feel like they can actually be successful at something that's really going to get them on a pathway to family economic stability.
All right, thank you.
Courtney, I also see another question here I'd like to pick a stab at.
Sure.
So somebody's asking that it seems like this is a no-brainer for community action agencies and Head Start to adopt 2Gen, and how does HHS and the regional Head Start governing bodies feel about this? So the first thing I would say is that in many ways it does kind of feel like a no-brainer, and I often hear people say, well, we do Head Start, so we're already doing 2Gen. And I hope that folks will see after we've done this webinar today that the parent component for 2Gen and whole family it's got to be very intentional, very intensive, and And although we do serve many Head Start parents as part of the Head Start model, we have a parent engagement requirement in Head Start, the resources available to really help move the parent to economic security are probably not there in many Head Start programs. So although I think that you can really take Head Start and build a great two-gen whole family, I don't think that Head Start in and of itself is going to get you there. I think you've got to think more intentionally about the parent component and health and well-being and social capital and all the things that Gail and I mentioned. So that's sort of one thing to keep in mind. On the other hand, I think Head Start is a really important piece, and many of the two-gen programs that you see, the early childhood component is a Head Start or early Head Start component. And I think Head Start is very supportive of programs that get clear and intentional about wanting to amplify and intensify the supports and wraparound services for parents. So I think if you do your thinking, if you've got your theory of change and logic model, and you can sort of talk about where you're trying to go, most funders and Head Start is like most funders are supportive. I will also tell you that Denise Harlow, our president of the executive director of the Community Action Partnership, just recently met with the Head Start Association, National Head Start Association Director Yasmina, and they had a nice conversation about community action and Head Start and 2Gen. So I think that different Head Start folks are supportive, and if you're interested in sort of embarking on this, I think as you start to talk to folks, you'll see that. So if folks have additional questions or concerns about that, you'll have my email on the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
All right, thank you, Jeannie. Looks like that's all the questions I'm seeing at this point. So we'll go ahead and proceed to our closing announcements, and then I'll circle back just to make sure no other questions have come in. All right, so just to let everyone know about some upcoming webinars that we have. Of course, today was the Home Family Building Blocks, concluding that three-part series. The next week, we're actually having a CCAP webinar, for any of you who have engaged in the CCAP process, that is coming up, and that link is on our website. But then on November 28th, our webinar Wednesday is going to be focused on how a kitchen for Head Start kids can become a social enterprise. So this is focusing in on community economic development, and that November 28th webinar will be hosted by our Community Economic Development Department at the Community Action Partnership. And then also, as far as our partnership resource library, it's kind of new and improved. So there's some enhanced search functions, and then you can search by different categories such as webinars, toolkits, online tools. So I encourage you to check that out. You can do a keyword search. So if you're interested in more about whole family or service integration, you can just type those words in, and then you'll get webinars, toolkits, and things like that on certain topics. So you go to communityactionpartnership.com, tools and resources, and then you select our resource library. We, of course, still have our CSBG TNTA Resource Center. So there's hundreds of resources located and archived in this resource center, as well as a consultant bank. So encourage you to check that out as well as you're looking for resources possibly around 2Gen or other topics we've talked about today. Coming up in January is our Management and Leadership Training Conference. It is January 15th through the 18th, with the main conference being the 16th through the 18th. This conference kind of compares to our August annual convention in that this one is a little bit more of a deeper dive into the management and leadership topics. So a little bit more advanced level workshops that we try to put on. We're going to be focusing our plenary sessions around topics such as equity and advocacy this year. And then we have lots of great 3-hour deep dive workshops planned, as well as some shorter 1.5 to 2 hour workshops as well. The Learning Communities Resource Center does have a track that we're sponsoring, so we're going to be having sessions on social determinants of health, whole family approach building blocks. We're also going to be having peer presenters from various groups within the learning community talking about service integration, financial empowerment, and the whole family approach. So registration is open on our website if you go to the events tab, and you can find out more information there. And lastly, contact information. So any questions that come up after the webinar, feel free to reach out to anyone on our team. We can always get field questions over to Gail as well. But these are the email addresses for us here at the partnership that are on the Learning Communities Resource Center team. So always feel free to reach out to us if you need to. And with that, I believe that's all the questions I'm seeing, and we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. Jeannie or Gail, did you have any final comments?
No final comment, except thanks to everybody for taking time today to join us, and thanks Courtney and Gail for your contributions and your help with this webinar today.
All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. And I did see just one last question come in about the PowerPoint. This session has been recorded, and PowerPoint slides as well as the recording will be available on the partnership website in the resource library after the event within about 2 business days. So thank you all and have a great day.